Thank you for being such great participants in our first session. And we seem to have some technology going on. So while the technology is going on, I'm just going to make a few additional announcements. And then we're going to have an announcement from our student government president, which I know everyone will pay attention to very seriously. But first of all, if I may, some of you may know, others of you may not, but we had very much hoped that Speaker Pelosi would have been with us tomorrow because this is her 60th reunion year. And she and Paul have endowed a chair in global affairs for Trinity. Unfortunately, you may have seen on the news this morning, and her staff called me, Paul was assaulted in their home in San Francisco last night by an intruder. So Nancy is on a plane back to San Francisco right now, and I know you will keep him and her and the family in your prayers. The news says that he is in the hospital, he will recover, but it's just another terrible indication of the violent times in which we live. And even people with a great deal of security are not secure. So when we think of them, please say a prayer for him, and I know that your well wishes will be going to him and your concern to Nancy as well. She very much wanted to be here to announce the chair. We will announce the chair tomorrow at the convocation, and we will offer prayers as well. So there's that sad bit of news as we start our program. We have a happier announcement to make. We have a wonderful student government here at Trinity, as we always have had across the years. How many student government presidents are here from times? Okay, there. Hello, I see you there now. Yes. How many Alumni Association presidents are here? Let's see. I see some Alumni Association presidents. There we go. I see Sue. I see. Oh, Peggy Jo. Hello. Member of the Alumni Board. I see Monica here, and I know Jo Locks is here. Where's Jo? She's here somewhere. Our current president. But I want you to meet Miss Ingrid Chaumo, who brings a special message that I hope you will hear. So, Ingrid, Madam President.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I would like to wish you a welcome back on campus to all our fabulous alumni. I would also like to let you know about this incredible fund that has been created last year by the Student Government Ecology. Help a Sister Out Fund is the first ever student-to-student fundraising program at Trinity. It was conceived to help our students experiencing any financial hardship to help them along the way. Since the beginning of the fund in February 2022, we have raised over 12,000 student donors, faculty, and staff. The funds we raised are directly provided to students for emergency needs such as transportation, healthcare, medication, laptop, computers, and anything else. We believe money should not be a limitation to education, and we really hope you will all be able to donate to this fund to help continue our sister completed education. Students are able to submit the funding request directly on the Trinity website to the Dean of Student Affairs and can often receive immediate financial relief depending upon the needs. I would like to invite you to please see me after during lunch. I will be announcing I have a Gable, so if you'd like to learn more about the fund or learn how to donate, please come see me, talk to me, to just whatever opportunity is changing. Let me know. I'll be able to talk to you. And thank you so much for being here today.
The Help a Sister Out Fund last year. As you hear, they've already raised $12,000. This is students contributing to help other students and help them to do things, whether it's, get a computer or get some transportation money or pay the rent. Our students have many needs that are life needs, and the students decided that they would contribute to help each other. We've had many generous alum contributions as well to our emergency funds, but the emergencies are constant. So if you can help a sister out by helping Ingrid raise a little more money, she'll be over in the dining hall at lunchtime. And thank you so much in advance for that. Now, we're about to have a wonderful, wonderful panel of some of our faculty experts and guests. And I am just pleased to introduce Sister Camilla Burns of our Religious Studies and by the way, formerly known as, they didn't call it the Mother General, but she used to be the Mother General, the congregational leader for the entire Sister of Notre Dame congregation. So, and she's been on our faculty for the last 10 years. And Dr. Gable, Associate Professor of Philosophy. Some of you sat on Dr. Gable's classes yesterday. He is fantastic. And Dr. Hsieh, our chemist, Associate Professor of Chemistry. So they will be speaking about religion, philosophy, and chemistry in the next section. And I know you're going to enjoy it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kat. My presentation is going to be on the encyclical Laudato Si. It's commonly referred to as care for our common home. And it's the encyclical from Pope Francis that our last speakers referred to as the most important document of the 21st century. The word encyclical is a Latinized version of the Greek enkyklios, which means circular. It's very simply a circular letter meant to circulate. This doesn't quite do it yet, but let's click the arrow. Up and down. Let's see what we got here.
How about you step up down?
I will. I'll click it for you. You want to tell me? I'll see if I can get a battery and then give you a
Can we just use the up-down keys?
Yes. Yes. Go ahead and go for the up and down, and I'll see if I can get this. This is not working because it's over there.
Oh my goodness, all this new technology.
This circular letter has come to a halt.
We're one of the battery. Oh, here's my one. Here's our
Press this. Okay. So it's this circular letter. We've arrived. It's a public letter from the Pope. It frequently develops Catholic teaching in the light of current events. And encyclicals are very often addressed specifically to Catholics. But in Laudato Si, the Pope addresses this to every living person on this planet. So it really is a circular letter. This is the second encyclical of Pope Francis. However, his first one was a completion of Pope Benedict, who retired right before he was able to complete his last encyclical. So, as a gesture to his brother, Pope Francis completed the encyclical of Pope Benedict. So this is his first chance to speak in his own voice. And it does tell us something about what is the first thing he wants to talk about. And it is about the environment. word Laudato Si itself comes from the first words of the document. We usually refer to these documents in the opening lines, like in Pacem Terris. So in Laudato Si. And that is a prayer of St. Francis of Assisi celebrating all the canticles of creation. And they praise God for the goodness of all things in the earth. So Laudato Si is in Italian, and it's opening translated as Praise be to you. And I think a lovely little comment, a note that's often neglected, is that Francis used the dialect in Italian used at the time of St. Francis. So this would exactly as the prayer sounded in the time of St. Francis. There are 6 chapters in this book. There. And the first is that Pope Francis describes what is happening in our common home. And he lists what we find difficult to read, but we also know is true. He summarizes the scope of the problem, which is enormous. And he includes things like pollution. You can all write this yourself. Climate change, water scarcity, loss of biodiversity. We've just heard wonderful talks about all of that. And global inequality. So in his first chapter, he lays out the problem. In the second chapter, he moves immediately to the Bible. And he talks about all about creation in the Bible. There is so much about creation in the Bible that there is a movement that now calls it the Green Bible. And this really is. All of the passages in here about creation are in green. Now, I've been swimming around this text for a long time, but I couldn't believe, I was stunned at all there is in this Bible about creation. So we call it the Green Bible. And Pope Francis draws on it as a source of insight in creation. And he starts with the Genesis story. And he corrects what's long been a misinterpretation of the Genesis story. We have interpreted that God gives us dominion over the universe. So the universe becomes an it, and we are in control. And Pope Francis does correct that. He said it is not a correct interpretation of the Bible, but it has had a long history. He said that in the Bible, the natural world, in Genesis especially, is portrayed as a gift. That's a very different way to look at it than I have dominion over you. It's a gift, a message. And we heard so much this morning about the message of the cosmos and of the earth. It's the common inheritance of all people, the earth, and creation. I think another way to think about the Bible is creation is the dominant theme. The book begins with the stories of creation, and it ends in the book of Revelation with the New Jerusalem. So it's an overarching, and underneath that are many references to creation. So in some ways, I would say we don't have to start to create things new. We have to go back to what we have and realize how rich those resources are. In chapter 3, the Pope talks about what causes that ecological crisis. What are we doing that's causing that? And again, you would be able to write this document. The social trends and ideologies that have caused the present environmental problems. Unreflective use of technology. Unreflective. The impulse to manipulate and control nature. And that, I think, comes from the misunderstanding of Genesis, that we should have dominion over. And this is really key to Francis's idea, and we've heard it in many keys this morning. We are not separate from the environment. We are in it. We might look at it in an objective way, but that's really not accurate. We're in it. And also, Pope Francis points out our narrowly focused economic theories and moral relativism. Now, all these need further thought and reflection, but he's painting the whole picture as he sees it. So the first chapter, he describes the problem. The second, he turns to the Bible for insights about the beauty and the wonder of creation. And then he talks about the human roots. And when it gets to chapter 4, that's the crescendo of his document. He talks about integral ecology. We are not separate from any of it. We are in the social and the environmental problems. And in many cases, we are part of the environmental and social problems. We're part of a broader world, and we have to consider the interaction of the natural systems and the social systems. The natural's not over here, the social's not over here. Francis puts his arms around both of them. And the study of ecosystems must consider the ethical and spiritual dimensions of how humans are meant to relate to each other and to the natural world. And this morning we heard that as eco-spirituality and eco-justice. Another way to talk about integral theology, because it is integral ecology, it is the peak. It's the peak. He's worked up to this in his encyclical. In very simple language, the mind and the heart, science and art, faith and the whole spiritual life of culture is one. We can't think my heart and mind are over here, and science is over here doing that, and art is over here. Francis says, what's urgent is that we begin to see and put our arms around all of them. They are all deeply, deeply intertwined with each other. In the last 2 chapters of the encyclical, he recommends certain things that can be done. So in the chapter 5 of the 6, we're getting there, he talks about what political life needs, what needs to happen in political life. International agreements to protect the environment, assist low-income countries, new national and local policies, inclusive and transparent decision-making, and the economy ordered to the good of all. Now, we might look at this chapter and say, well, that's in the public domain. Those politicians have to do that. We're all citizens, and we have a responsibility. We have a civic responsibility to the political solutions of our time. And we have to do whatever we can do as citizens to contribute to the awareness and to the support of those who are working in these areas. And then finally, this last chapter, he talks about ecological education and ecological spirituality. This, he ends by bringing it all personally to us, each individually. So, our lifestyle has to be focused less on consumerism and more on timeless, enduring values. That's so easy to read. It's another whole story to look at the consumerism in our lives and do whatever we can to include deeper values in that. Environmental education, this is Exhibit A, what we've done here this morning, and what the programs that Trinity has introduced. He talks about the essential aspect. Now, I don't think we should say to ourselves, well, this generation ought to go to school and learn about education. We have to educate ourselves. And this morning we were given all kinds of references to how we can do it. To books and online. We could watch that whole presentation again this morning. There was so much information in it that it's well worthy of more consideration. And have joy in one's surroundings. There's a joy in creation. It's just, we get so accustomed to it. I mean, look what those trees are doing out there. I looked at those yesterday and I said, well, who asked you to dance? They're just, you just take your breath away, so don't just pass them by. Spend a little time again and again, rejoicing and realizing we're born into it, we live in it, and we take it so for granted. So take that time to spend a little time about the beauty of it. And civic love. We are citizens. We are responsible as citizens, and we need to have a civic love. It might be difficult at times, but we're called to do that as citizens. It's interesting that in the personal chapter, Francis calls us to civic love. And ecological conversion. That's really what this is all about today. We're all being asked to move into an ecological conversion, a change in the direction. The Jewish tradition has a wonderful word for conversion, and it's shuv, and it means to turn towards all this life-giving world and all this communion. And we'll be, while we do that, we're turning away from consumerism and those ills that plague our life. So the ecological conversion is deeper communion with God, other people. It's not me and God. It's us and the world of nature. So if that's the integral, everything fits. But Francis doesn't leave anything out. So I could summarize in another way, what are the top 10 takeaways from this? What am I going to take home? First of all, the spiritual part of ecology is now and must be a part of the discussion. Our speaker said that just brilliantly this morning. We can't have science over here and somebody over here talking about the values. That's together. So there has to be the spirituality of ecology has to be part of all of our discussions on any level, science, art, whatever it might be. The poor are disproportionately affected by climate change. We only need to watch the evening news to learn that. But also our speakers did list all those places, like Flint, Michigan. And the top 10 takeaways, I would say, Pope Francis is saying less is more. In a consumerism society, that's hard for us to swallow because we're so oriented in that direction. And what he has done for the Catholic Church, Catholic social teaching now includes the environment. Up until this time, it was separate. But now, the Catholic social teaching includes environment. It's integrated into the system. And that's what this encyclical has done. And so, Pope Francis says discussions about ecology can be grounded in the Bible, the Green Bible, and can be grounded in church tradition. It's not separate. Ecology is not an issue, and church tradition isn't over here. He said they are one. They are inside each other. Everything is connected. Everything is connected, including the economy. And he also says, he praises science. Their research and the work that's being done on the environment is to be praised and to be used. Sometimes we think, oh, spiritually it's science. And we put science right over there. It's to be praised and used. And widespread indifference and selfishness worsen environmental problems. We can walk away from it, and say, I'm not going to get involved in that, but by that very action, you are contributing to the problem. We do have to get engaged in it. And Francis, and he has accomplished this and is accomplishing it by the Laudato movement. And I encourage you to watch that letter that's on YouTube about the movement now and how it is affecting people around the world, the movement of Laudato. So we need global dialogue and solidarity, and he's accomplished a lot by this encyclical. And finally, a change of heart is required. That's probably the most difficult, to change how our heart is moved by all of these issues. So I would say, in closing, the planet is in our hands. You can't walk away from it. It is in our hands. Whatever we accomplish in our life, we are affecting the planet. It's on our hands. It's not us and the globe. It's on our hands. We are integrally part of it. Our fingerprint is everywhere. The map of the world is our fingerprint. And that's what Pope Francis is stressing. We have to begin to change your heart and realization how integrally connected we are to all this. Whether we realize it or acknowledge it, we are. We are. And finally, the question that I want to leave you with, and Pope Francis leaves us with, how do we want to end on this gorgeous globe and planet to the next generation? It's in our hands. It's on our hands. And we need a change of heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Camilla. That was a wonderful talk. And I want to spend a few moments talking about a couple of key themes that come up a lot in Chapter 4 of Laudato Si, but they find themselves really reiterated throughout the entire encyclical. And these are the ideas of environmental stewardship and the common good. So we'll talk about those ideas next. So, Pope Francis, he gives an interesting definition of the common good in Chapter 4. And I'm just going to look over here because I see this, my eyes. But okay, some of those conditions of social life which allow social groups and their members relatively thorough and ready access to their own fulfillment. So the idea, according to Pope Francis, is that we as a society have to create the conditions under which every member of society can flourish and every member of society can find his or her fulfillment. This is what it means to nourish the common good, to have a concern for the common good. But it's interesting that he notes that there is a common good for the social group as well as a common good for the individual. He mentions the social groups and he mentions the individual members of social groups. So an analogy that I would use, and we'll take a look at someone else talk about it a little bit next, but it's almost like a college itself or a university itself. To some extent, and I think I'll use a good example of this, that education is a kind of well-rounded fulfillment that someone hopes to walk away from college with or to graduate from the university with. So that would be, individual fulfillment. But what about the individual, or what about the fulfillment of the social group? Or if we think of the university as the social group, it's to create those conditions in which the individual students can find their individual fulfillment. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. We're going to look at that a little bit next. So we're looking here at Jean Maritain, a French Thomist philosopher, who pointed out that there is this dynamic between the individual and the individual as a member of society, the responsibilities that an individual has as a member of society. And so I picked an example solely to make Dean Ronnie Bertie happy, and maybe Dr. Luce, but I'm just kidding. But okay, mathematics. And this bears to be a little closer examination. So thus, a mathematician has learned mathematics thanks to the educational institutions which social life alone made possible. So we don't come away as mathematicians on our own. Society creates those conditions in which we could become, if we were so inclined, a mathematician. But this progressive training received from others, and which attests to the indigent status, the limitation of the human individual. We need society. We also need the natural environment, which we'll see in a moment. But we need others to become fully sufficient, to become self-sufficient, if you want to think of that. That was the way Aristotle sometimes talked about this idea. But I love the last part here, and the community is entitled to expect a mathematician to serve the social group by teaching mathematics. So it's not enough to receive the mathematical training, wipe our hands and walk away and do our thing. The idea is no, we need to contribute next to what's going to create the conditions for other people to flourish. So this is in a sense, our individual responsibility to the common good. And if we take a look at the social responsibility to the common good, it's to set up those conditions, but as individuals, we also bear that responsibility later. So the mathematician now must help foster the conditions for future members of society and for society itself to make further mathematical discoveries and gain further knowledge. So we could apply this kind of dynamic to the natural environment, and we can understand the ways in which the natural environment sustains human life, both in terms of our material existence and in terms of spirituality, which Dr. Tucker and Dr. Grimm so nicely illustrated this morning. So, just to take a look here at Hsieh, a very well-known scholar and environmental activist, the idea is our very life is utterly dependent materially, to begin with, but that's not the end of the story, on the natural environment. On the air we breathe, on the water we drink, on the food that we eat. So environmental stewardship, it does represent a binding duty on us as members of the community to preserve and to protect the natural environment in terms of our material sustenance. But there's also our spiritual sustenance, which we heard a lot about today in very powerful ways. So Pope Francis talks about how beauty, the beauty of the natural world is so necessary to our full spiritual development. So just to give you an example, he talks about how large cities need to make green spaces available to everybody. They need to be accessible to everyone. Now, I can tell you, as a city person who sometimes doesn't get a lot, leave the city very often, I kind of understand what he's talking about. We need this connection to the natural world, even in our highly urbanized environments. The idea is that, our leaders have a responsibility to make sure that we get this connection. Because it's not just material sustenance, but it's also spiritual sustenance. We need both to be fully fulfilled as individual members of society. Now, to me, and I heard Sister Camilla also reference this, one of the most remarkable parts of Laudato Si, that, in my opinion, is that we have an obligation to people who are not even in existence yet. We talk in ethics a lot about, okay, what are my duties to others, and what are their duties to me? So we talk a lot about, what is it that we owe the people with whom we live in our communities? But this is a really interesting idea to me, that we have duties to those who are not here yet, that we will never meet. But those duties are binding on us as strongly as those that we bear to those who live among us now. A really interesting idea. So environmental stewardship has to recognize this idea that the common good is also owed to future generations. We have to create the conditions, and of course he's focused on the natural environment as one of those conditions, to allow future generations to fulfill their own lives. And, he makes this point again and again throughout the encyclical, but, it's like, who are we to deprive them of this possibility? It's through our own kind of selfishness, as Sister Camilla put it. So I do want to say this, though, that human beings are not the entire story. This is an interesting part of the encyclical to me. We're talking about human fulfillment, and we're talking about how society should help create those conditions for human fulfillment. But as a deeply, of course, spiritual document, there is also the idea that other species and other creatures have inherent worth. And he talks about the natural ecosystems as having inherent worth. And I always tell my students, because no one else wants to listen to my stories and they're forced to, I'm going to share one with you too, which is, I was with Dr. Watts. And so you'll vouch for this, and I'll pay you for your line later. No, we were in San Diego for a conference, a conference on environmental issues, and we were in attendance, and it was 2015. And the encyclical had just come out. There was a great deal of buzz around it among all the participants from many different disciplines. And I remember one afternoon, as we were attending conferences, I just decided, I'm going to take a little break. And we were very close to the beach. And I decided, I'm just going to go to this cliff-side overview of the ocean. Now, this is a spoiler alert, but I am originally from California. But I was absolutely stunned by what I saw, looking over this cliff. Not too close to the edge, but just seeing this amazing expanse of this very deep blue water and just the absolute silence. There were people everywhere, but no one was saying a word. It was almost as if everyone were just communing with the sea, like the voice of the sea we heard a little bit earlier today. And this was to me, I wasn't planning to use the ocean. I had no plans to harness it for economic activity. There was no use value whatsoever. But it was just absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I just remember this idea that Pope Francis was talking about. Like, it's the beauty of the natural world and the value that creatures in the natural world have, independent of anything that we plan to do with them. This sometimes gets lost in what he is going to call, our consumer culture, or the technocratic paradigm is another way he talks about this. So I love this picture of the frog. It's poisonous, evidently, but it's beautiful to look at. Just don't come too close, I guess. Okay, now, one interesting thing I think I pulled out from the document is this idea of extreme consumerism. And the idea that extreme consumerism is a very dangerous idea because it covers over a duty to maintain the natural environment, because we're not thinking of the natural environment at all, other than in ways that we plan to turn it into some kind of product that we can purchase and consume. So this is a really interesting idea. In other words, the Pope is arguing, we do have a duty to protect and preserve the environment, but rampant consumerism is hiding that duty from us. It's like taking it away from our sight. So intense consumption, you can see it this way, it fails to associate the natural environment with human fulfillment. We don't think of it in terms of human fulfillment. We just think of it in terms of what is it that we can make of it, and then what is it that we can purchase and use. Okay. Now, so I made a little slide here called Thinking Beyond the Fulfillment Center. And we're talking about the Amazon Fulfillment Center, because that is one way we could think about fulfillment. It's one I've often thought about when I want to purchase that used book and get it sent to me the very next day. That could be an idea of what fulfillment is, but that's a very consumeristic idea of fulfillment. And Pope Francis is saying that we have to, and this is one of the key takeaways, we really have to reimagine, reevaluate what is it that fulfills human existence. It's the question that we're not asking. It's the question that we're neglecting. In other words, it's not just a question of can we improve our recycling programs? That is something that can be very helpful. The Pope would say, okay, that's a praiseworthy goal. But what's at the center of this need to consume so much that we have to think in terms of recycling programs? In other words, why is it that we want to consume so much? This is really the issue. So he brings up a very striking phrase here. The emptier a person's heart is the middle point, the more he or she needs things to buy, own, and consume. These are some harsh words. It becomes almost impossible to accept the limits imposed by reality. So the whole idea of a common good disappears because we're not thinking in terms of human fulfillment. We're just off our radar at this point. He also mentions that we find ourselves in a self-centered culture of instant gratification. I think there's a great deal of truth to that observation. And so, as part of that thirst for gratification, we also lose sight of how that affects the natural world around us. The natural environment, maybe, is the best way to put it, because as Sister Camilla also said, it's not as if we stand here and nature is over there. We are together always, and sometimes we lose sight of that as well. So, this is from a business ethics text that I particularly like and I thought was quite prescient. But this is from Paul Campish. And the idea here in his article, which is all about getting to the heart of the matter, he calls it, like what business ethics is all about, is that we do have to think about what constitutes human flourishing and human fulfillment, because if we don't, the corporate world is there to give us a different way of thinking about that, one that will satisfy their bottom line, basically. So the idea here is that if we don't consider truly what production and consumption does for us in terms of human fulfillment, and whether it leads to real human fulfillment, then the business world will just continue to encourage that model and encourage us to produce and consume, as Pope Francis would say, beyond what the earth is capable of sustaining. An interesting question he brings up is, what if the entire world consumed at the same levels we do in the United States or Europe, for example, or in the so-called developed world? He claims that the world couldn't sustain this. It just wouldn't be possible. So there's this hard challenge to the document, I think. As beautiful as it is in so many ways, there's also this hard-hitting urgency to it, as Dr. Tucker mentioned earlier, to really reopen these kind of questions for evaluation. So Camilla also points out, what's happening here is businesses are going to take, in many cases, non-renewable resources, transform them into goods that we could purchase and consume, and they may not even have any value for us. Maybe think about single-use plastic items, for example. So the convenience of drinking out of a plastic cup once or twice. The idea is like, okay, that's a really short-lived value, and it's coming at the expense of a non-renewable resource. Is this really what we want? Now, according to Paul Camish, the corporate world would love us to continue to purchase such items, but we have to try to break free from that in a sense. Now, Pope Francis talks about it in terms of a technocratic paradigm, where, technology, he claims, is like it's always welcomed. I think Sister Camilla put it as like an unreflective embrace of technology and what it can do. And Pope Francis would be completely on board with that. It's almost like if the technology is there, we ought to use it to create a commodity that someone will purchase. But is that what we want? The corporations, this is Pope Francis, okay, they're doing this with a view to short-term profit. But these products don't do anything for long-term human fulfillment, which is really what we should be worried about. Okay. So, Sister Camilla had her top 10 takeaways. I am trying to be even more dramatic. I didn't remember mine. I have 3 major takeaways. And number 1 is, and this is why I think reading Laudato Si is kind of like a glass of cold water to the face at times. But it's this: we have to reevaluate now. What do we understand as fulfilling human life? So, education seems to be a part of that. Health seems to be a part of that. Healthcare. Building families seems to be part of that. Spirituality seems to be part of this. What part does consumption, the widescreen television, how does that fit into the picture? Buying one before my last one is worn out. That's the challenge. And this is an uncomfortable challenge, one that we're probably not too eager to embrace. So, point number 2 is that we have to get a clearer determination of human flourishing and fulfillment. Because for the moment, our consumer culture is telling us that unlimited consumption is the way to go. And when we think about economics and economic growth, now, I'm not claiming to understand economics well, but this seems to be part of the story. Economic growth is we produce more, we get those products consumed, we clear the market, and then the next cycle we can produce even more. So the more that each of us is consuming, the economy is growing. And he finds this model to be untenable and basically unsustainable. And then finally, if we came to a better understanding of what human fulfillment is, and maybe there's no easy answer to it, to that question. And there may be different cultural approaches to this, and there may be different answers. But he feels that we have to at least try to do this. Because if we can get a better view of what human fulfillment is, then naturally we will, or consequently, we will want to preserve and to protect the natural environment. It would mean more to us if we could fully understand what it is we're trying to achieve as we take our short sojourn here on planet Earth. So finally, kind of like a setup piece for Zeus, but I just wanted to say one last thing which was kind of interesting, and this is from Pacem in Terris from Pope John 23rd. But his idea is that government itself only finds its legitimacy insofar as it promotes the common good, insofar as it makes human flourishing possible. So, though we tend to agree, and we've heard today, the political technical responses to the climate crisis are largely unsatisfactory, yet that's also on the table too. The idea that our government leaders should provide the kind of policies that will protect the common good moving forward. And in fact, it's a startling statement in this encyclical. I mean, this is the only purpose for government, to be honest, is to try to promote the fulfillment of the members of that particular nation, state, or city, or county, or state. Okay, so therefore, government leaders and institutions also bear responsibility to craft effective policies to protect the environment. Now, we've heard today that sometimes we're disillusioned with this, but in a purely theoretical way, which may be hard to put into action, this is what government should be doing. So I'll leave it here. I thank you for listening to this, and I'll turn over the clicker to Shizuka.
I'm grateful to Trinity. Trinity has changed the way that I do science. It's given me a way to lose my faith in my teaching and in my scholarship. So before coming to Trinity, I was at Smith for 12 years. I taught chemistry faculty, and I did research with undergraduates in a laser lab, and we did quantum mechanical calculations. And as much as I love the chemistry, what's happened here at Trinity is it's given me a way now to be doing science differently. I'm doing it with communities in DC, and there are 3 case studies that I want to talk about, and the lessons that I've learned from working with these communities, doing air quality monitoring. These are communities that suffer disproportionate pollution burdens, and they have taught me so much. I need to thank my partners in this work, in this advocacy work. I can collect the data with the community, but these are the people who make sure the policymakers actually see those data. And I have folks from a neighborhood called Brentwood, a neighborhood called Ivy City, and also in Buzzard Point. And again, these are the people who are helping bring the communities together and make their voices heard. So my first case study is Ivy City, not too far from here in Ward 5, not too far from Trinity. It's a traditionally African-American neighborhood, and the pollution sources that they have suffered over the years, as DC has treated them as a dumping ground, include the heavy-duty vehicles like snowplows and trucks that belong to DC. They're parked there. The school buses, they're parked there. There's industry, including a chemical plant that's making adhesives that's actually sharing a wall with residents on the other side, with family living there. There's gin distilleries, they smoke fish, there are trucks coming in and out carrying all of the food production that's happening in that neighborhood. And that neighborhood is also home to the Alexander Crummell School, which was one of the first public elementary schools for African Americans in DC. So in 2012, when I came to Trinity, I connected with a group who was fighting a proposal to put yet another pollution source into that neighborhood. The proposal was to take overflow buses, tourist buses from Union Station, and rather than having them idle around Union Station, they were to come over to Ivy City and park until they had to go pick up their passengers again. So the air quality monitoring was very much a part of that effort to halt that proposal. Here's a picture of Andrea Swanson, a longtime resident, standing near Cornell School, and you can see that the land has already been cleared. Land is cleared so that it can become a bus parking lot. So this is a piece of data, an example of what we found. What we found by doing the monitoring was that pollution was higher in Ivy City, air pollution was higher in Ivy City than in other parts of DC, including the places that DC was doing its air quality monitoring. Perhaps not surprising, but here we actually quantified it. So an example is black carbon. That's that cloud of smoke and black soot that goes by when a diesel truck goes by, right? We're quantifying that, and this shows that over the course of a day, 24 hours, the levels are higher in Ivy City than they are at the nearest DC monitors. And also you can see, like very early in the morning when the school buses have started to go, that's when it starts to shoot up, both on the actually weekdays, which are on the left, and on the weekends. Even on the weekends, they have an uptick in black carbon in that neighborhood. We were also able to extrapolate from a couple of months worth of data and conclude that it's very likely that there were exceedances of EPA air quality standards in that neighborhood. And that was really important because this strengthens the community's argument that we are suffering poor air quality, that putting in another source here, right, is only going to make that air quality worse. So that was just one piece, right, of a large advocacy of those community members having their voices heard. And I'd like to think that it did make a difference, because even though, as the lawsuit was going forward, the lawsuit from the community to say, this can't happen, the judge actually ended up siding with DC, allowing them to park the buses at the Alexander Cornell School, but it never happened. It never happened because DC Council heard from the community, and Mayor Bowser in 2015 halted the plans to use that as a bus parking lot. And while that sounds like a moment of triumph, of advocacy, I learned so much more from the community. And that comes back to the points that Marianne Tucker made earlier, the points that Sister Camilla and Stephen Gable have made. Right? That cleaner air is only one part of the integral solution, that the solution needs to be about the whole. And we're doing this at Trinity. This is where we think about each student individually and think about that student's well-being. It's not just the mind, it's also the heart. And it is my science colleagues coming up with mental moments, of course, that science majors take, so that they're not only thinking about how to succeed in those science courses, but they're also thinking about how to overcome challenges, how to build resilience, how to take care of themselves so that they can be in a position to do good work. And they wrote this note down from Stephen Gable's talk, right? How do we create foster conditions, right, for individuals to flourish? That's what we're doing. So the same thing is true in Ivy City. Yes, that one victory brought a little bit cleaner air, but there's so much more that Ivy City needs. Top photo is Antoine Williams, whose brother Percy died of gun violence in Ivy City. There's a photo below of children playing basketball in the streets. Why? Because there's no park for them to play. And Stephen Gable talked about how, right, that access to green space, that is something that's actually important for fulfilling, right, our humans. And Ivy City, if you go over there right now, you'll see that, yes, they decided not to use Cornell School as a bus parking lot, and instead, it's getting gentrified. So there's traditional row homes next to now apartments and very fancy apartments. And so residents are getting priced out of these communities. And Cornell School is still surrounded by a wall. It's been 6 years, and it's only a couple of years ago that after that photo of the kids playing basketball in the streets came out in the Washington Post, right after that they actually got a basketball court and some of that. Right? So there's so much more. There's so much more than just advocating for clean air. When we're advocating for an environment, we're also advocating for the whole inner goal, right? That inner goal, well-being. My second case study is in Buzzard Point. It's also an African American neighborhood. This community has 2 concrete batching plants and non-stop construction. National Park, Audi Field, soccer stadium, they're both in that area. And we conducted air quality monitoring as part of the residents' fight there to get better permitting so that the concrete batching plants weren't creating so much dust. To get better coordination within DC so that they weren't doing 5 construction projects at the same time with no peace for the residents whatsoever. Here's a quote from Ms. Geraldine. Ms. Geraldine would tell me about how she can't open her windows. She can't open her windows because of construction dust and the diesel trucks going by. The air is terrible. And the residents know that the air quality is bad. My colleague at UBC did a community health study and found that 42% of the residents said, I've been diagnosed with asthma. But she asked more questions about their health and discovered that an additional 24% actually had all of the symptoms that would classify as asthma. The air quality here is bad, and the residents are suffering. So I figured that if I go and do some air quality monitoring, we can do what we did in Advocacy. We can show that the air quality is bad, and that would help advocate for change. I found that air in the city did not exceed any US EPA limits, and I felt like I let the community down. But the community, instead of being really angry, said, well, why is that? We know that our air quality is bad. Maybe there's something wrong with the EPA standards. And that is the kind of thinking we need, right? This is Rhonda Hamilton, one of my heroes, absolutely. The more we fight back, the more we learn. And this is what we learn, right? We learn that we can reanalyze the data. We can reanalyze the data and say, okay, US EPA standards were not violated, but what do the data actually look like? This is looking at particulate matter, PM10, which is associated with dust, and we found that levels in Buzzard Point exceeded World Health Organization standards. Well, why is that? The World Health Organization standard for PM10 is 50 micrograms per meter cubed. The US EPA level is 150, right? So it's 3 times higher. What is that? Also, the way in which community members described the dust was that it would come in these huge clouds, and that's when they would get the coughing and that inability to breathe. So maybe we should look at the way in which the pollution is being delivered. Instead of doing 24-hour averages, 1-hour averages, maybe EPA should start thinking about the intensity of the event. And maybe there are these frequent high-intensity events that are actually causing a lot of health problems. So this ended up going in an academic publication, right? It's not policy, but it's a drop in a bucket of a body of literature that is really starting to question EPA standards and say, should we be thinking about this differently, right? And that is something that then changes the common good, because the people who are going to benefit are not just the people on Buzzard Point, it's going to be everybody in the United States. My third case study is one that I've only engaged in recently. This is the neighborhood of Brentwood, which is across the street from Advocacy. Now, this neighborhood is not traditionally Black. This neighborhood was, until the 1940s, predominantly white. And while there were industries in Trinidad and Ivy City, which were Black, there were no industries there. However, 1949-ish, Blacks started moving to the neighborhood, and now it is predominantly Black. And at the same time, zoning was changed, so it's now industrially zoned a lot of it. In fact, Ward 5, I keep on showing these maps, right, with the blue being the Black population and the red being the white population of DC, and Ward 5, where we are, where Ivy City, where we have 50% of DC's industry. So this neighborhood, you can see it from Miss Sharon's house. Miss Sharon is the host of one of my monitors, and she can see trash transfer station. She tells me it smells so bad. She comes out sometimes and she actually literally throws up. She also has an asphalt plant on that same street, so you've got diesel trucks coming in and asphalt, right, being generated a block away from her house. So we are doing air quality monitoring now, and it's all part of the effort to fight a proposed bus. But this is the thing. Where are the buses parked now? They're parked in Ivy City. They're moving them from Ivy City to Brooklyn. So again, we're going to include, as part of that lawsuit, health impact analysis. That's going to include some of this air quality data. This comes back to the common good. Right? The goal of this advocacy work isn't to keep the bus depot out of the neighborhood just so it goes to another community that's going to suffer. That's not the point. The point is to change the policies and the way in which things are done so that nobody has to suffer that. So, connecting back again to Sister Camilla, to Mary Evelyn, and to John Grimm, and to Stephen's points, the common good. Environmental justice is really about the common good. And Mary Evelyn mentioned the 17 principles of environmental justice. They go beyond EPA, which EPA says that environmental justice is the fair treatment of individuals and having those individuals have a say in what kinds of environmental pollution sources are in their neighborhood. It goes beyond that. And some of these 17 principles include balanced and responsible use of land and renewable resources to the interests of a sustainable planet for humans and other living things. So this is where the advocacy work that we do is really about changing the bigger policy picture. And the folks I'm working with in the communities really understand that, and that's what we've done. So I want to thank Trinity again for being a nurturing place for me to do this kind of scholarship, which is so far departed from quantum mechanics. And for many academic partners who are doing the air quality monitoring with me. In fact, my first air quality monitoring campaign I had over at the University of Maryland and just borrowed equipment. And I also brought in some equipment from Smith. Since then, we've acquired some. Thank you very much. Oh, that brings me to thank my funding sources, because that's where a lot of the equipment comes from. So I believe I am the last between you and lunch. I'm hoping that there's time for questions, but I really wanted to put this slide up because you can notice that if you look at Sister Camilla's degrees, math, physics, chemistry, and I haven't checked his CV, but I heard who has a degree in chemistry. So, go science. Thank you all very much.
Okay. Thank you so much. Aren't they wonderful? We'll get to 2 questions and then we're on to lunch. So, 2 questions. We've got one teed up already.
Hi, my name is Celeste. I'm a senior here at Trinity. I was really confused with I wanted to figure out, like, how come do you feel like you were only picking the Black communities to do all of this? Like the bus parking lot, something I'm gonna call it, where putting buses where they don't need to be. And I know, like you said, that 40% have gotten the diagnosis. I have patients that work at Washington Hospital Center that came and said, yeah, I live there, and that's why I cannot breathe. And it's like, it's hard to say that, but they're all in their 80s, 90s, and so they live with this all their life. And how does someone get involved with what you do?
The answer is thank you so much for that question. I need to give a shout out to my environmental science 281 class, because they're the ones who replicate for this talk and the questions. So let's see how I do. Environmental racism, it's real. And that is part of the environmental injustice movement, recognizing the environmental racism that's happening. But what's really sort of puzzling and makes you pause in Washington, D.C. is that the leadership in Washington, D.C. are black. Right? So this is black on black injustice. And we really need to think about that as well, right? It's economics, it's socioeconomics. The developers are benefiting from a lot of this. Nobody wants to have trash conversations in their areas. So it's easiest to put it in places where people don't have the resources to put that. How to get involved, right? There will be environmental organizations that have the room later today, and you can get involved with them. And Advocacy is one specific organization in DC that does this kind of work. Did I answer all of your questions?
Yes, my name is Linda Escott, class of 75, and I have a very, not anything what you said here, but a very basic question for everyone. I'm a participating member of my church, all this kind of, I have never heard of Laudato. I swear to God, I have never heard of it, and so it's been very illuminated here, but I think there is within the church an issue of getting the message out.
Indeed.
Good.
Mr. Camilla, do you have anything to say to that?
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
All right. Well, we need to know the name of that church because we're going to send Sister Camilla over. How does that sound? I know everybody's bringing the questions, and I'm sure our faculty will stay and want to talk to them, but I have been told that lunch is ready, and you know the dining hall gets antsy if people don't show up for lunch on time. So, we're going to go from here. You're welcome to go over to Alumni Hall at your leisure before 1:30. The next panel starts at 1:30 with our students featured. So please come back here for students. Stop at the EPA table. Our friend Bo Williams is there. And Dr. Candace Boyd from EPA will be here at the 3 o'clock panel. I want everybody here too. Thank you all.